The sirens had long gone silent, but the echoes still lived in the cracks of the pavement. Flashing red and blue lights had faded from the scene hours ago, leaving behind only scorched rubber marks, the distant murmur of reporters, and a thick silence that clung to the early morning fog like grief. By the edge of the cordoned-off crime scene, where shattered glass glittered like stardust across the sidewalk, a small girl stood motionless, too still for someone so young. Her face was streaked with dried tears and city dust. Her clothes, a little pink hoodie and sneakers, were stained with something that once looked like strawberry jam but wasn't. It was blood. The officer, tall and broad-shouldered, had seen many things in his career: bodies broken by the cruelty of fate, victims frozen by terror, suspects hardened by indifference, but never a silence like this. Never a child who didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't ask for her parents. Just stood there, eyes vacant, like her soul had left moments before her body caught up. He knelt down, his knees creaking beneath him, lowering his height to hers. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice the softest it had been in years. "You're safe now. It's over." She looked at him slowly, as if registering human presence for the first time in hours. And then she did something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. She walked forward. Slowly. Cautiously. And she hugged him. It wasn't a desperate, childlike embrace. It wasn't needy. It was intentional, measured. As if she was offering comfort instead of asking for it. Her little arms wrapped around his uniformed chest, and before he could even breathe out the tension he didn't realize he was holding, she whispered into his collar two words so quiet, so fragile, they nearly dissolved into the mist. "Tell him." The officer froze. "What did you say?" he asked, pulling slightly away to see her face. But she was no longer looking at him. She was staring past him, at someone behind the police line. At a man who stood apart from the crowd, his hands clenched in fists, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. The little girl simply pointed. The officer followed her finger with his eyes, and everything stopped. The man, tall, expensively dressed, face half-shadowed by guilt and disbelief, wasn't part of the investigation. Wasn't even listed in any of the interviews they'd done that night. And yet, something in the way he stood. Something in his eyes. The way he didn't blink. Didn't move. As if seeing the girl had triggered a memory he wasn't ready to confront. The officer looked back down at her. "Tell who?" he asked. But the girl had already stepped away. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because the man had begun to cry. Not a single sob. Not an outburst. But slow, silent tears, rolling down his face as if his body had just remembered how to feel. The officer stood, the back of his neck tingling, the hair on his arms raised like antennae catching signals from another dimension. He looked back toward his colleagues, who were wrapping up statements, tagging evidence, moving on from a night that would haunt him forever. But the man didn't move. And the little girl had already vanished into the crowd. Later, the reports would say it was just another downtown incident. A domestic gone wrong. A car chase that ended in a crash and a single gunshot no one could explain. But none of that explained the girl. None of that explained why her file didn't exist, why no one came to claim her, why the security footage later that night showed nothing, no hug, no whisper, no child. Only the man, now sitting alone on the sidewalk, sobbing into his hands. 6 hours later, that same man, identified as Nathaniel Cross, CEO of a billion-dollar security tech firm, walked into the precinct and requested to speak to the lead investigator. "I know who she is," he said. "I know what she meant." The officer didn't even ask how he got past reception. He just looked at the man and asked, "Who was she?" And Nathaniel, with a trembling voice that didn't sound like it belonged to someone who once testified before Congress, said, "She's my daughter." There was no record of a daughter. No birth certificate. No adoption paper. Nothing. Except for one thing the officer couldn't shake, the whisper. "Tell him." Tell who? He had asked. Now he knew the answer. The question was, tell him what? That's when Nathaniel pulled a small, weathered envelope from his coat pocket. And the photo inside changed everything. 6 years earlier, the air in the small town of Brooksville carried the scent of dry leaves and distant chimney smoke. Autumn had arrived quietly, like it always did here, without the flashy announcement of city billboards or the rush of holiday sales. It came with stillness, with gray clouds moving lazily across the sky and rust-colored trees swaying like old women stretching their aching backs. It was in this sleepy backdrop that Officer Daniel Whitmore had transferred in. No fanfare. No expectations. Just another badge looking to escape the chaos of bigger places. Daniel had been a detective in Chicago. The kind that didn't smile often, the kind that showed up at crime scenes before anyone else and left long after the last chalk outline was washed away by rain. But when a little girl named Tessa was found alone at a crime scene one night, blood on her shoes, her eyes wide with things no child should ever see, he broke. He stayed with her in the ER, refused to go home. And when she whispered 2 words into his ear, his life collapsed. The next morning, he resigned. No one ever found out what she said. But something in those 2 syllables cracked open a part of him that had been locked tight since his own daughter's funeral. Now, in Brooksville, he lived quietly. He walked with a limp from an old case gone wrong. He talked to almost no one. The other officers called him the ghost cop behind his back, not out of disrespect, but because he seemed to drift more than move, haunt more than live. He volunteered for night shifts, avoided school zones, and never once set foot in the children's ward at the local hospital. Until one rainy October morning, when the dispatcher called in a minor traffic altercation outside St. Agnes Elementary. A delivery truck had stalled in front of the school gates. Parents were honking, kids were late, and it was the kind of thing Daniel usually left for rookies. But that morning, he went. Maybe it was the tone in the dispatcher's voice. Maybe it was the date, it was October 13th. The day his daughter would have turned 13. He didn't say a word. Just grabbed his coat and left. When he arrived, the chaos was minimal. A white van blocking the gate. A woman in scrubs arguing with the driver. Children streaming past, backpacks bouncing. But then he saw her. The little girl standing completely still in the rain, her tiny frame pressed against the gate like she was trying to melt through it. Her face was pale, her braids wet and undone, and in her hands she clutched a worn-out stuffed rabbit. He didn't know what made him stop. Maybe it was the way her eyes were locked not on the adults but on him. Maybe it was the rabbit, which looked exactly like the one his daughter used to carry. Or maybe it was the fact that she didn't blink. Not once. He approached her slowly, the way you approach a deer on a frozen lake. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. No response. He crouched to her level. "Do you know where your mom is?" She stared. Then took one trembling step forward. And hugged him. It wasn't the kind of hug kids give strangers. It was the kind that wrapped itself around your ribs and squeezed out everything you didn't know you were holding. He froze. Her arms were cold. Her cheek against his shoulder was damp and shaking. But he didn't move. He hadn't been touched like that since. Then she whispered. Just 2 words. And every atom in his body forgot how to breathe. "Hello. Daddy." He blinked. Once. Twice. The world blurred. "What?" he croaked. But the girl stepped back already, her hands still on his coat. "Mom said you wouldn't remember. She said your memory broke." He dropped to his knees. Rain soaked through his pants. "Your mom," he whispered. What's your name?" She looked down. "Eva. Eva June. Eva June." His wife's middle name was June. He didn't speak. Couldn't. The voices of the arguing adults faded. The rain vanished. The world became just her eyes and the cracking sound of something ancient inside him giving way. He remembered flashes. A motel room. A storm. A woman with green eyes and a soft voice. A goodbye that didn't feel real. A call he never made. "Where's your mother now?" he asked, choking on the words. Eva turned slowly. Across the street, a woman stood under the awning of the bakery, her face pale as chalk, her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding in a storm. Her eyes met his. And everything came rushing back. Her name was Maya. They met when he was undercover, pretending to be someone he wasn't in a world of people who didn't know their own names. She was a waitress who liked jazz and honey in her coffee. They spent one night together when the world had gone quiet. She had told him she didn't believe in love, but she believed in kindness. He had promised to return when the case ended. He never did. And now here she was. Older. Sadder. Still beautiful. Still wearing the silver chain he gave her. He stood, slowly, like a man waking from surgery. The girl, his daughter, watched him with a look too old for her years. He took a step forward, but Maya stepped back. He paused. She shook her head. Her lips moved but no sound came. Then she turned and walked away. Eva looked up at him. "She said you wouldn't want us." Daniel's mouth opened. Closed. The truth sat heavy on his tongue, he hadn't known. But now that he did, he would never let go again. He bent down, looked her in the eyes. "Eva, do you trust me?" She nodded. Slowly. He took her hand. "Then help me make this right." And they walked together through the rain, one step at a time, toward the woman who had carried the weight of silence for too long. Maya didn't look back. Not even once. Her feet moved faster than her breath could keep up, her heels clicking on the wet pavement like a countdown she didn't want to hear. Her arms were crossed over her chest, as if she could shield herself from the thing she had feared for 6 long years, recognition. She had always known this day might come. She had prayed it wouldn't. She had even written a letter once, sealed it in a drawer, addressed to a man who would never open it. But she never expected Eva to be the one to bring him back. She reached the alley behind the bakery and leaned against the brick wall, her breath fogging in the cold air. Her hands trembled as she pulled a pack of tissues from her coat and wiped the tears she didn't remember starting. It was too much. Too fast. Too late. "Mom." The voice came softly from the mouth of the alley. Maya's knees buckled slightly as Eva walked into view, hands still holding the man's, Daniel's. Her Daniel. The man she had loved and lost in a single season. He looked different. Older. Tired. But still him. Still the man with that quiet intensity, the one who read poetry at midnight and traced her fingers like they were scripture. Maya straightened herself and stepped forward. "Eva," she said, ignoring the man beside her daughter. "You shouldn't have run off." "She was scared," Daniel said, his voice lower than she remembered, more gravel than velvet now. She turned to him, finally looking at him full on. The years between them collapsed in that single moment. Her face hardened. "You don't get to talk to me like you know us." Daniel didn't flinch. "I don't know you anymore. But I knew you once. And I remember enough to know I would never have left you if I had known." She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and small. "You didn't leave me. You disappeared. You left no number. No way back. I waited. I waited for weeks. Do you remember what you told me the night you left?" Daniel searched his memory like a man digging through rubble for something precious. "I said I'd call. I said I'd be back. You didn't." "I was injured," he said, voice rising, raw now. "The night I left you, I walked into an ambush. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And then, And then the station shut the case down. I was pulled off the assignment. I tried to go back to the motel, but they said the girl was gone. You were gone. Maya's arms dropped. Her anger slipped, just slightly. I didn't leave. I was forced out. The owner sold the place. I had no money. No idea where you were. And when I found out I was pregnant. Daniel's knees wavered. You were alone. I was terrified. She looked away. And I didn't want to raise my daughter around broken promises and unanswered calls. So I erased you, Daniel. For her. There was silence. Heavy. Stretching between them like a bridge no one dared cross. Eva looked between them, her small face pinched in confusion. Why are you fighting? Aren't you happy? Maya blinked. Oh, baby. It's not about happy. It's about what's real. What's safe. Daniel stepped forward. And what if I want to be real now? What if I want to be safe for her? For both of you. You're 6 years too late, Maya said, shaking her head. Maybe, he said. But she's 6. That means I still have time. Maya's face crumpled for a moment. She turned away. You don't understand what it took to survive. I worked 3 jobs. I fed her on tips and scraps. I had nights where I counted change to buy medicine. And she never once asked why she didn't have a dad. Until this year. And you know what I told her? Daniel couldn't answer. I told her her father was brave. That he was out there trying to make the world safer. That maybe one day, when he was done, he'd come find her. That's the only fairy tale I ever gave her. Eva tugged her mother's coat. You told me he was strong. Like a lion. But I didn't know lions cry. Maya looked down. Daniel looked away. I'm not here to take anything, Daniel said after a long pause. I don't want to disrupt your life. But if there's a place for me, even just as someone she can talk to, someone she can trust, I want to earn that. You don't get to just walk back into her life. I know. That's why I'm not walking. I'm staying still. For as long as it takes. Maya closed her eyes. The part of her that had spent years building walls was screaming. But the other part, the tired part, the part that had spent every night listening to Eva ask about a man she could never describe, was silent. And that silence said everything. I don't forgive you, she whispered. I don't deserve it. But she does. Daniel looked at Eva. She deserves everything. Maya nodded once, slow and trembling. Then start there. He crouched beside his daughter. Hi, he said softly. My name is Daniel. Can we get to know each other? Eva tilted her head. You already know my name. He smiled through glassy eyes. That's a good start. Can I tell you a secret? He nodded. I made you a birthday card. Last year. Even though I didn't know when your birthday was. I just picked a random day. And I drew a lion. Like me. He swallowed. Can I see it sometime? She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He took it like it was made of fire. When he opened it, a child's drawing stared back. Stick figures, a big man with a badge and a little girl holding hands. Happy birthday, Dad, it read, in crayon letters that wobbled. It was more than a card. It was time, sealed in ink. It was love, unasked for and unreturned, until now. Daniel looked up. I'll take any day as my birthday. As long as it's one I can spend with you. Eva beamed. Maya looked away, her shoulders shaking with something she refused to name. Somewhere in the distance, the school bell rang. Life was moving on. But something had paused in this alley, something sacred and broken and still breathing. Daniel stood. I don't have answers, he said. But I can promise this, I won't disappear again. Maya met his gaze. Then don't. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. They simply stood in the rain, two people holding on to the thinnest thread of forgiveness, woven through the hand of a child too brave for her age. Sometimes, redemption doesn't shout. It whispers. And this one whispered through a child's crayon dream. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a hush of fading orange that stretched over the city skyline. It was the kind of evening that made the world feel a little softer, like the universe had exhaled after holding its breath too long. Daniel stood at the corner of Ashberry and Pine, a bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and Eva's handmade card in the other, edges worn from too many nights rereading. He hadn't heard from Maya in 4 days. Not since the alley. Not since she let him speak to Eva. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't called. He simply waited. Quietly. Patiently. Like she needed him to. And then, just after 5 p.m. today, a message came. Short. Fragile. Eva's recital. 6:30, room 204. Don't be late. Don't make me regret this. Daniel had read it 10 times. Each time slower than the last. He now walked the narrow hall of Eva's elementary school, nerves jangling in his chest like broken glass in a jar. His boots echoed against the linoleum, a sound far too loud for a man trying to move unnoticed. The folding chairs in room 204 were already half filled with parents, siblings, and sleepy toddlers climbing over backpacks. The stage was barely raised, its curtains faded red, held together with tape in some places. The kind of stage built not for perfection, but for trying. Daniel spotted her immediately. Eva. Hair pulled back into 2 tiny buns, dressed in a white dress with pink shoes that squeaked every time she shifted her weight. She was standing beside another girl, nervously clutching a plastic recorder. And then she saw him. She smiled. It wasn't the shy smile of a child unsure. It was something else. Something older than her age, warmer than the room. She gave a small wave and then turned to look behind the curtain. Maya emerged a moment later. She wore a long navy coat, her hair tied back, and the same guarded expression she always wore in public. But when her eyes met his, it shifted. Not into joy. Not yet. But into something that allowed her to walk across the room and stand beside him without flinching. You came, she said. You invited me, he replied. A beat of silence passed before she added, she asked me to. She wanted you here. Daniel nodded. She's brave. She's mine, Maya said. Of course she is. There was no bitterness in her tone now. Just pride. Just love. He remembered that feeling. The way Maya could carry both fire and stillness in her chest, like a woman constantly ready to burn the world or rebuild it, depending on who was watching. The lights dimmed, and the first note of the piano broke the quiet. Daniel sat down. Maya didn't move at first, but when Eva took center stage, Maya lowered herself into the seat beside him. As the children played their clumsy tune, missing beats and giggling in between breaths, Daniel found himself unable to look away from Eva. She wasn't the best. She forgot a note or two. Her recorder squeaked at the wrong time. But she was the most focused, the most present. And when she finished, her eyes found his again. He stood. He clapped. Maya did too. Not out of obligation. But because in that moment, both of them knew, Eva had carried something fragile all this time, and tonight, she had finally laid it down. After the recital, the hallway buzzed with tired joy. Kids yanked at snacks, teachers smiled for photos, and the air smelled faintly of juice boxes and sweat. Daniel waited by the exit. Eva ran into his arms like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Did you see me? I saw everything, he whispered into her hair. I played the squeaky part on purpose. That was my surprise. He laughed. It was perfect. She stepped back and reached into her pocket, pulling out a tiny silver badge, a toy, the kind you buy at a dollar store. She pinned it onto his coat with trembling fingers. "You're my officer now," she said. Daniel's throat closed. "Thank you, sweetheart." Then came the moment that felt like glass cracking slowly in a silent room. Eva tugged at his collar and leaned in close, whispering two words that made the world tilt on its axis. "Come home." 2 words. Soft. Childlike. But carved in stone. Daniel glanced up, his eyes meeting Maya's. She had heard it too. And for the first time in years, her face wasn't unreadable. She walked toward them slowly, every step deliberate, as if each one was a decision she had to make again. "You know what she means," Maya said. Daniel nodded. "Do you?" "I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'll ever trust anything again completely. I don't expect you to. I just want to be where she is. Where you are. Even if that means sitting outside the door for years until you believe me." Maya looked down at Eva, now digging through a goodie bag with complete disinterest in the heavy adult moment unfolding above her. "She thinks it's that easy," Maya said. "She's not wrong," Daniel replied. "Maybe it's us who made everything harder than it needed to be." Maya hesitated, then reached out and touched his coat lightly, right above where Eva's badge sat. "You still have that scar." He blinked. "Yeah. I used to dream about it," she said. "Wondered if it healed. Wondered if it meant you lived or just left." He reached for her hand. It healed. But it never stopped aching. There was no music. No cheers. No grand cinematic fade. Just the buzz of old fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of families going home. And then Maya let her hand stay in his. "I'm not saying yes," she murmured. "I'm not asking for yes. I'm just asking for maybe." She paused. Then smiled, just a little. "Maybe." Outside, the night waited for them. The city was the same. But somehow, something in it had shifted. Daniel opened the door and held it for both of them. Eva skipped out first, humming an off-key version of her recital tune. Maya followed, then paused, turned, and looked back at him. "I don't know if you're ready," she said. "I don't either," he replied. "But I'm not leaving again." And with that, he stepped outside. Into the night. Into the maybe. Into the family he didn't know he still had.